give it another minute. We got some more people coming in. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to have to read because there's no teleprompter, so everybody knows how the bifocals work. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the breakout session, Using Data to Improve Transportation Safety Programming and Finances. I'm Pat Malamphy. I'm an at-large board member for the Board of Transportation, and I live in Moore County in Pinehurst. The session is meant to be an engaging conversation that's both informative and interactive. We encourage you to upload the event app. If you have not done so already, you can get all the latest details, schedule, and information on our sponsors for this year's summit. To access the app, visit the App Store and search CVent Events. For our session, please hold questions until the end when we'll have a question and answer session. We will also have a poll question during that time. And on the app, you'll be able to find the results. I'm going to introduce Kevin Lacey. Kevin is the Director of Strategic Planning and Programming for the entire state of North Carolina. Correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Kevin Lacey.
Thank you, Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. Not as tall as we got a good mic stand to get the height range here. We're glad that you're able to join us this afternoon. We actually have a wonderful panel to talk about data and using information in transportation and in our businesses. I look forward to the conversations with the panelists here. The way it's going to work is we're going to have a short presentation from each one of them, and then we will have some questions, and we'll have an opportunity for some questions from the audience as well. Now, those who've already looked up the poll question, the real question comes up is how is Kevin going to tie that poll question back to this topic? And I assure you I will. So please go onto the app and look at the poll question, and we will go over that at the end of the session. Did you see the generation conversation earlier today? Yeah. You must be one of those pre-boomers. Excuse me, sir. We'll move on. Our first presentation today is Brett Boston. He started his career in transportation at the American Enterprise Institute and went on to work with the Georgia Department of Transportation. He then held roles in artificial intelligence field, and his company, Globalware, won the Best in Show in Groupware in 1994. The company was eventually purchased by Network MCI. Today, we're excited that he has found his way back to transportation industry as the founder of Foro, using artificial intelligence to utilize transportation data. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Boston.
Poll question there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so using data to improve transportation safety, programming, and finance, and my title was just all of the above. That big idea from me today to you is really it's about integration. And so how do we tap into all the databases we have and make those complex decisions that we need to make that involve integrating across all of our platforms. And so to me, it's the integration of your data sets and having the right tools to mine that data across platforms. So that's the big message for me today. The other piece is how do you grow your digital maturity? And so digital maturity is a lot being written on this now, but it's really about this, what state you are in right now as a organization in terms of understanding the future of data and what's happening to us with AI, artificial intelligence, and the other technologies coming our way, which these young men will be able to talk to you about in depth. But in essence, it's a maturity phase of where we are with our data, with our staffs, with the skill sets that we have in-house, and with the tool sets that we're putting in front of our folks to make good decisions and help us make good decisions. My grandfather always said the easy decisions have already been made. We've already solved the easy problems. That's the tough stuff that's always left to the next generation to solve. And I think the tough stuff now is very much the stuff that's going to require complexity and understanding broad ranges of data. We're no longer going to have one discipline being able to answer questions just for that discipline. The challenges facing us today are really interdisciplinary challenges that are going to require interdisciplinary data sets and interdisciplinary thinking. We heard this morning in the plenary, for example, just how much those leaders think about when they think about locating businesses and technology centers in North Carolina, and all the planning and all of the cross-functional work that has to be done across agencies. It's way beyond any one single data set. So as I look at that, what is our current state of digital maturity in any organization? Overall, right now, we've got kind of the haves and have-nots. The transition for legacy organizations like DOTs and government entities is a tougher one in some respects than startups who can just start out with new technology, young people, and get their data right from the beginning. Taking and transmitting your data now and saying, okay, I need to use data that I've been collecting for 30 years, that is a much greater challenge for a legacy organization. So that's the big piece there, is getting ready for the maturity you're going to have to do. The key for me, too, is that right now it's about investing in the future is get going. There isn't a right answer for how to make use of your data. There isn't a right answer for what's the best approach, but there is get your feet in motion is the solution. You've got to get started with something right now, dealing with complexity, looking at data sets, and really assessing. It's picking a big problem and taking it on that's going to let you know what your maturity level is right now as an organization, the quality of your data, the quality of your team, and your understanding of how to really address problems. To me right now, I think it's the big problem that everybody's got that we're working with, and we're working a lot with state transportation agencies right now, is the data that we have is fit to form. You've had these fabulous applications that you've had for generations that you've been pumping data into, and none of them talk to each other. And yet the solutions that we need, the answers that we need, really involve somewhere in the interstices of where that data comes together to make a big decision to handle complex issues that you're facing. Well, right now, most of us can't do that. The data over here is really cool, and the safety people have this really neat thing that they've been keeping up for years and years and years. And how does that talk to what the finance people are doing, and how does that talk to, and it's that integration piece, I think, that is the big one. So how do you get your data, or the data that you need to answer a question, in one place where it's accessible quickly and your teams can get to it to actually mine it for the decisions that you're facing? If you just think of one today that would take all of that, is taking your safety investments that you have right now. So what would be the number one investment you would make in safety that you could justify financially, you can justify from an engineering standpoint, you can justify by crash data, mortality data, you can justify by technologies and the materials that you're using to actually do preventive? And answering that question, I believe, is one that involves lots of different data sets coming together to answer that question. And the one data set that most people don't think about is that data set that's coming externally. How much external? Now, TIMS is coming in. You're starting to see transportation information management systems that are taking advantage of the traffic flow data that's being provided by Waze and others, right? You're buying into that for traffic incidents response, et cetera. The key is external data now needs to also be integrated into the data sets that we're counting as important to us to make decisions as well. So we can't just be isolated by the data that we've been collecting for years and years and years. Finally, it's sort of how do you really get to data complexity and begin analyzing it? To me, it's really your great staff. It's whatever business intelligence tools you're using. You have BI tools right now. There's some business information tools. There's dashboards that you're using right now. Great. I would say to you that AI and machine learning is going to be part of that future. You're going to need to really dive in and find complex patterns there. Your folks are really smart, but they can handle 5 plus or minus 2 bits of information. And the solutions now and the patterns that you're looking for in data are way beyond that. Our current AI programs are running trillions of calculations in an hour, just to really get at and find those patterns and those solutions. It's months of staff work. But if you can basically give staff a set of tools right up front that'll let them find those patterns and then use their brains to make them better. Because I don't think computers can answer the questions, but I sure think they can find patterns and start giving you the data tools that you need to start doing the predictions that you need to make and answering the big complex questions. So I think AI for me is really about doing the heavy lifting. It's the data analysis that you really don't have time for your staff to actually do. It helps you really to get better at answering the questions that you want to answer. AI is iterative. ChatGPT right now is on everybody's hot button. Who hasn't heard of ChatGPT, raise your hand. Okay, so universities today are going to, I was talking to one of the vice presidents in the breakout room. Universities today, I mean, it's over. How do you now grade a paper when the computer can actually write it? How do you know? I mean, universities now are changing how they grade and look at curricula. It's the way we teach has just changed. Like it or not, it's really over. And so we have to start thinking about AI is here. How do we integrate it? How do we utilize it? How do we take advantage of the capabilities that it has? And it really is, at the end of the day, a tool that's going to help you. We talked this morning a lot about workforce. If you want to attract and retain workforce, have state-of-the-art tools that they can use and use their bright brains to answer those kind of questions. Folks are looking for what's that next generation organization look like, and I think AI and those kind of predictive tools are going to be part of that. And really, finally, how do you get going? Pick a complex issue, get a small team of experts together, grab all the data you can find. You're going to do this iteratively, apply some machine learning, predictive analysis to it, and just keep going from there. It may or may not have the data that you need to answer it. You'll know that pretty quickly, but you got to get in motion. Being in motion is critical with technologies today. You've just got to adopt them, put them in play, and start teaching your staff how to use them and why they're important. So Fora, we're a group of decision scientists, and we work really hard to help our clients take those complex issues and make them real simple as fast as we can. So thanks. That's me.
Thank you, Mr. Boston. We hope AI doesn't become self-aware and become like Skylab for some. Our next speaker is Mr. Alan Jacobson from Alteryx. He's the Chief Data and Analytics Officer. Mr. Jacobson leads the company's data science practice. He is responsible for data management and governance, product and internal data, and the use of Alteryx platform to drive continued growth. He is also the recipient of various awards, including the Automotive Hall of Fame Leadership and Excellence Award and Outstanding Engineer of the Year by the Engineering Society of Detroit. With these accolades, we're very excited to have him here today. Please help welcome Mr. Alan Jacobson.
Does the handheld work?
Yeah? Okay. Maybe I'll try it this way. This will be a little bit more dynamic. I won't be glued behind the podium. Quickly, just a show of hands, because I actually don't know who I'm speaking with today. Who in the audience, because this had a finance title, who here is from a finance organization? Okay, a few. Safety organization. Who are the data scientists in the room? Are there any? And how many analytic professionals do I have in the room? Interesting. Okay, I'm not sure who everybody else is. We're gonna figure this out. So if I rewound the clock over 100 years and looked at kind of the early days of data science, I'd run into people like this. Does anybody know who this is? This would probably tell me who the data scientists are, because this is in most data science programs. That's it. You were almost on the map. I'll go there in a second. This gentleman is John Snow. If you've never met John, this is John, not from recent TV shows. And the map, and that's where you were going, is downtown London. And maybe it's apropos, but a pandemic was happening. This is the cholera outbreak. And John here decided to start plotting where people were getting ill. So the little marks you see on the map are where people were getting ill from cholera. And he looked at the map and he saw this pattern right around the Broad Street pump. And he said, boy, it's something to do with the pump seems to be making people sick. The pump is a water well, right? People would pump their water to drink by hand. And so he went to the town council and he said, well, why don't we take the handle off the well, off the pump, and see if it clears this up. And it did. And I would consider this a great early case of data science, using the data to solve a problem, change the world, really. I mean, if you think about it, he not only ended the cholera outbreak in London, he ended it around the world because now people knew part of the cause. John Snow, anybody know what his profession was? And I'll give you a hint. There were no data science degrees back in 1855 when he did this. Any idea what his profession was? Economist, statistician, what do you guys think? Doctor. He was a domain expert, right? He knew a lot about medicine and a little bit about data and analytics. And this is a pattern we see repeating itself again and again. Ooh, I'm going the wrong way. In the world. Anybody who know who this is? The year, I'll give you a hint. The year is the same year. So it's 1855, 56, same time period. See, analytics is a very diverse sport. This is Florence Nightingale. And Florence, again, kind of topical today for unfortunate reasons. Florence was sent to Crimea, also in the news quite frequently right now. And she worked under a tent with mud on the ground. It was an army field hospital. And she was using data to try to figure out how to treat patients and have them survive at a higher rate. And the little graphic that's a little hard to see in the background is a graph showing how many people were getting sick and injured, and then suddenly, it's a radial graph, so not the way we normally do it, suddenly it plummets down to almost nothing. And it turns out you were safer if you got ill. If you were in downtown London and you got pneumonia, you didn't want to go to the best hospital in London, you wanted to go to Crimea and be treated by Florence. You had a better chance of surviving in the Army Field Hospital with mud on the ground and tent over your head because she was figuring out wearing masks, washing your hands, these very basic things that we still talk about today. She figured all of that out in 1856 using data. Many of the modern practices we use in medicine today, and especially in this pandemic, washing hands and wearing gloves, came from Florence. What was her profession? Nurse, right? And so what we see again and again in data science at the leading companies in the world who are doing really well at this, whether they're small or whether they're large, is that it's domain experts changing the world, not data scientists. I say this as the chief data scientist of a technology company. But what I'm really passionate about is how everyone is starting to learn data and analytics to use in their professions, because it's really the domain knowledge that you carry that wins the day, that makes the breakthrough. And so there are organizations that go and assess companies on how analytically mature that company is. This is from the International Institute of Analytics. They've assessed thousands of companies and government agencies for their analytic maturity. And it's rated on a 1 to 5 point scale. And the average organization today is a pretty middling, and boy, that font is hard to see, it's a pretty middling 2.2. And I don't know about you, but when I was in school, if I got a 2.2 out of 5 on the test, that was not a good day to come home and show my parents the test, right? That's a pretty bad score, 2.2 out of 5. And it represents a very small percentage of knowledge workers in the organization, usually less than 10%, can get past a spreadsheet. So if I gave you a bunch of data out of a bunch of different systems, and I said, let's use data and analytics to analyze what's going on, if I ask you at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, what percentage of employees could do something beyond a spreadsheet? If it's 10% or less, you're probably in that stage 2, right? And that would be very normative. That's 80% of the companies in the world are sitting in stage 2. Any idea the most advanced company IIA has ever assessed? I guarantee you use them on a regular basis. What company do you think is the most advanced analytic company on the planet? Amazon. You got it in one guess. You didn't have to read the research. I heard Amazon over here too, right? Wasn't hard. Almost everybody guesses it within the first 2 guesses. You use their stuff and you can kind of tell. And it's not because they have 2 people sitting in an ivory tower, double PhD data scientists that are doing it. It's because a very large percentage, 40, 50, 60% of their employees can use data to solve problems. It doesn't matter if you're in the marketing department, the tax department, the accounting department. Everyone is expected to be able to use data and analytics and go past a spreadsheet. And that's the big difference. By the way, Amazon is a huge customer of Alteryx. They do use other tools beyond just Amazon tools to do data and analytics. And so if you're a knowledge worker today, and do I have anybody who's a marketing professional? I assume I can pick on marketing because I'm assuming the North Carolina Department of Transportation doesn't have a lot of there's one marketeer in the world. Okay, so don't be offended by this. Actually, you may be able to answer the questions better than anyone else. So 30 years ago, if you were a marketer, you didn't need to know anything about the internet because the internet really didn't exist 30 years ago in business. It wasn't a thing 30 years ago, which is hard to believe it was only 30 years ago and we didn't really have an internet, right? So 30 years ago, you could be the best marketer in the world and know nothing about the internet. Today, 30 years later, do you know what you call a marketing professional that knows nothing about the internet? Unemployed. The polite word might be retired, but they're not doing marketing. And somebody argued with me, oh, but how about the person who does like colors, brand colors? And I said, no, actually, digital colors are different than print colors. Like, no, they have to know about the internet too, right? That was 30 years. You went from being able to be the best in your profession to you can't hold a job if you don't really understand the internet beyond just the basics. Like, you need to understand how this thing works, right? Data science is quite similar. 28 years ago today, Business Week magazine published the first article about data science in business. That was 28 years ago. The day is coming, it's not far away, that if you're a finance professional, if you're a marketer, if you're logistics, a safety engineer, doesn't matter what your profession is, if you don't know how to use data and analytics, you're probably not going to like what your next title is. The world is changing, and it's changing really, really fast. And so my hope for all of you is that you're going on that journey, and if you're not, hopefully you're not intimidated by it. It's an easy journey with modern-day analytic tools. Anyone can go on this journey. Alteryx is taught in over 900 universities around the globe. My kids are both certified. It is not hard to do analytics with modern-day drag-and-drop tools. So my hope is that you'll all pack the bags and go on the journey.
Whichever you prefer. Thank you, Alan. That kind of reminded me when I started working in DOT, this was 1993, there was just a handful of computers around. And there's a few of you I can tell from, as the senator put it pretty nicely, as the wisdom that's showing through on our beards and hair. There's plenty of you that probably remember when there were not computers at all in our workplaces. And today, if you don't know how to use a computer, you're generally unemployed, or you're doing something that you're probably not going to be bragging a whole lot about. Our next speaker is Mr. Gil West with Cruise. Mr. West is the Chief Operating Officer for Cruise. He leads the company's operation and commercialization of the Cruise's driverless, all-electric ride-hailing and delivery service. Prior to joining Cruise, Gil served as the Chief Operating Officer for Delta Airlines, overseeing Delta's worldwide operations. Under his leadership, Delta became the #1 airline in the Department of Transportation's ranking, while also achieving record earnings for his industry. Please join me in welcoming fellow NC State alumni, Gil West. You gonna use this or no?
I'll just use this. Thanks. Well, I like that last part the best. Go Wolfpack, right? Yeah, go Pack. How many Wolfpackers are in here, by the way? Oh, my goodness. Man, I love it. Yeah, I was raised in Western North Carolina, so I don't get back to Raleigh as often as I'd like, but it's great to be here. One more show of hands before I get rolling. How many of you have actually heard of Cruise before you came here? Anybody? Wow, a couple of you. That's cool. Yeah, we're a name not many people know now. I hope that that'll change here shortly. But we're really an application of everything my colleagues here talked about. So we're an application of AI and ML. And we are an AV company. We build autonomous vehicles, but we also operate them commercially. So a little bit of background. We are owned by, sorry, just fast forward a bit. We're owned by General Motors, Honda, Microsoft, Walmart, and a few other financial strategic investments, right? So, and we're the very first autonomous company to launch commercially in a major U.S. city. So I'll talk some about that, but I just want to give you a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if I can get the tech to work here, show you a quick video.
Oh my God, this is so cool. I cannot believe this is happening. There's no driver in here. There's no driver in this car.
It doesn't make any sense.
The crazy thing is not just the car being here, but seeing them scattered around the city.
I rode with Scampi.
Flamenco.
Matcha, right? Disco.
Tostada.
Cheddar's absolutely the best. The right car for me. It was pretty surreal to see the car drive up and have no one inside.
Like the car drove better than most of the drivers I've been in the back of a car with before, and yet there was nobody there.
Hi there.
Hello.
Thank you.
This feels weird.
Slightly scary. Here's the steering wheel moving.
We jumped around from different bars. The car picked us up when we needed it and took us back safely.
The ride was a lot smoother than I was expecting.
And it was faster than I expected to.
I was impressed by the fact that it slowed down to go over speed bumps. It avoided a large truck that was parked very poorly.
I am literally witnessing the future. This is pretty impressive.
It's so smooth that you can ignore that and actually just start paying attention. It's like when you're in the airplane and like you're like, why is the Wi-Fi should be faster here? Like it's working.
And you forget that you're flying through the air.
This is the future. This is awesome.
All right, so that's who we are. Probably gives you a firsthand flavor of it, but just talk a little bit about our mission first. First and foremost, it's to save lives. Talk about that here in a second. I think that's probably why everybody's here. Help save the planet, right? We're an all EV fleet, so sustainability is important for us. Save people time, save people money, and then give more accessibility to travel. I'll double click a bit on safety. We could talk about any of those things for quite a while, but I'll double click on safety a bit here because it really is core to our mission. And I think everybody here knows just kind of the current state of play with safety on all our roadways is really unacceptable, right? You think about 40,000 people dying a year, millions seriously injured. Everybody here I know has lost friends and loved ones on the highways, right? So, and I know everybody here is all in to improve that situation. So that is core to our mission completely. And if you think about autonomous vehicles, they follow the rules of the road. They don't speed. Sometimes you want them to, but they don't speed. They don't drive drunk, drowsy, distracted. All basically don't do any of the things that are the leading causes of fatalities on our roads, right? So structurally, they're designed to be safe. But my background's principally before I joined cruise aviation, and In my prior role, I was the accountable executive for safety, so the buck stopped with me at Delta Airlines. And we've implemented the aviation's safety management system, which I think the industry itself's done a really nice job managing risk, managing safety, has some great best practices that we've adopted. But I'll honestly say I've never seen a more robust application of safety management system than what I've seen here. And I think it's a testimony to the data science that the team has and our ability to cut data, use it, and leverage the tools of a true safety management system to assess risk and drive the right mitigations to an acceptable level. And as we move forward through safety, data is the key to it ultimately. And if you think about our vehicles, we have over 40 sensors. This is LiDAR and radar and cameras and other sensors on every vehicle, right? And then we have a large fleet, so we have just tremendous amounts of data that's coming in to us. And with that data, we've got a compute system on board our aircraft or on board our vehicles that basically takes all that data in, perceives the world around it, right, visualizes the world with it, and then predicts all the characters in that world, what they're going to do. So whether it's a person on a sidewalk, where they're walking, how fast they're walking, another vehicle blocks away, all those different factors it's able to process, real time, predict, and then command the vehicle to do different things, right, basically to be safe. So taking that data, processing it, and then driving it into action is really the key to what we're doing. So so I think as you look at all of that, there's a number of different data sources that we use, and I would describe it probably in 4 different channels. One is real time, what the vehicle's experiencing, processing, and acting on. But then there's 3 other channels. One is simulation. So we've hired literally the best game designers in the world to develop simulation tools for us. We run literally billions of miles of every simulation you could ever imagine with our autonomous vehicle stack, computer stack, and software, and then do things, predict, see how the vehicle reacts relative to the code, and continue to iterate on that. So that's one channel. Another channel is supervised driving. So we've got people that are driving our vehicles day after day, accumulated tens, hundreds of millions of miles. The vehicle's driving itself, but we've got a safety driver there. So we're processing, get data, capture different events, run those back through simulation, continue to iterate on our code to make it safer and safer. And then the third channel is complete driverless. You saw it in the video. So over a year ago, again, we're the first company to launch commercially, complete driverless, no safety driver, big city, and we've commercialized it where you're able to download an app just like you would Uber or Lyft, call a vehicle, it shows up, it's autonomous, nobody else in the car, take you anywhere you want to go in San Francisco, right? And that data source now, literally in a couple of weeks, will break 1 million driverless miles. So literally 1 million miles on the streets of San Francisco with no other human driving it. So that's a whole nother channel of data that's come in. So all of that, quick iteration, continue to learn and just build forward through machine learning and improve the algorithm. So let me just leave you with a couple of more videos here, because I think it's important to know, this really isn't the future. This is happening now. So we've done it in San Francisco. We've just launched Phoenix in Austin, Texas. We're partnered, as I mentioned, with GM and Honda. So we're in Japan testing. We're in Dubai. We've got an exclusive deal with Dubai, launch autonomous vehicles. We're in the process of doing that. And we're gearing up for a huge year next year. So we're going literally from hundreds of completely driverless vehicles now to thousands next year, really across the country. So a couple of more videos just to illustrate it. This one is our purpose-built autonomous vehicle. So this will be the first vehicle certified by NHTSA. It's in the certification process now. We're driving it, testing it, validating it from a safety standpoint. has no driver controls at all. No steering wheel, no brakes, nothing. It's purely designed for the rider. If this will do it. So this is our vehicle here. You can see we're doing the testing here. It's closed course testing. But two big doors open up, 2 big bench seats, 3 on each side facing each other. It's a little smaller than a minivan, but it literally feels huge without the traditional driver controls in it. If you ever watch Westworld, it's kind of that Westworld thing. But we're literally building the vehicles now. We've got a couple of dozen of them, but we're geared up to produce almost 2,000 of them next year. And this is the factory that was created to do it in partnership with General Motors. You can see them in assembly here, robotic assembly plant in Michigan. And this is the plant that was designed to produce our vehicle. It's called the Origin. This facility also produces the Hummer, as well as the new EV Silverado. So this is a complete EV factory. So we are just kind of in close. We're really geared up to scale now. So I would just say that the autonomous vehicle world, and you read a lot about it in the press recently. You're literally watching a historic moment. The winners and losers are sorting out in front of us in this country, and it's boiling down to just a couple of us ultimately. And the competition is China. There's a big company in China as well doing it in China, and I think this is really what it boils down to. So there's a couple of big partnerships. We're really fortunate to have GM and Honda in our corner, and it's literally full steam ahead. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Gil. As I mentioned before, North Carolina's open, and we would love for you to bring your cruise technology here. All right, we're going to have a few questions. I'm going to have a few questions for the panel. Then we'll have opportunity for the audience to ask a question or two. And we'll start off with, I've got a couple individual questions I'll ask, and then we'll go from there. Start with Mr. Boston. As you know, transportation data are not clean. There may be free-form fields, legacy data elements, etc. What recommendations do you have to transportation agencies and other agencies about managing their data?
I can probably hit the room without it, but I'll use it. Yeah, data is going to be the big Achilles heel, and I think you're going to find that a lot of your legacy data is almost not worth cleaning up. In my way of thinking, it's almost like you're really going to need to start thinking about collecting data differently. And the data that you need is probably data you're not collecting or not collecting in a way that's usable in an AI world for sure, or a machine learning world. You've got a lot of it. I would say that you probably have applications that have some clean data in them and it's useful. We have states we work with that do, others don't. My take is that find a problem that you want to solve, and it will point out all the thorniness in your data pretty quickly. So rather than going in and trying to clean up your data for what purpose, have a purpose and then approach the data. That's my take on cleaning up data. But I would say that a lot of your legacy data, you listened to us 30 years ago when we said, save everything, it's cheap, right? Save it all. And you did, but you didn't maintain it. It's saved in multiple formats. The folks putting it in use different, we're going through data now where there's, in a certain state where I'm standing, there's 25 different ways of talking about concrete, okay? right? And the AI's got to figure out, concrete. Okay, so A. B, beyond that, we have, we're going to talk about a traffic light. Well, the traffic light has 25 parts, but we just use the same part number for the traffic light. So how does the AI know that you're talking about a $25,000 component of the traffic light, or you're talking about the lens, right? Because you just said, well, traffic light, it's a shorthand. And so your data, by and large, is going to have those kind of anomalies in it. They're natural, they were shorthand, and the person that put them in there was doing their job. They were trying to get that off their desk to contracting as fast as possible. That's great. Has nothing to do with answering the questions that we have to do right now. And so I would just say, as you look at your data, I wouldn't, my opinion, I'm probably, I hope I'm not a minority in this, don't worry about where your data is. Start making it better for the solutions that you need, is my take on it. I don't think we can go back and undo 30 years of how we've managed data. Start doing it better going forward once you pick the questions you want to answer. Thoughts on that one? Anybody at that? No?
All right, Alan, I enjoyed, and Alan has a number of articles on the web if you that are very insightful, and I enjoyed reading your article that data tells the truth, or does it? And in opening your, you use the example of the number of countries in the world, and the answer varies from 195 to 249. Last year at this conference, SAS talked about democratizing data, democratizing information. This is right along that path. How do you how do you deal with situations where the same data creates different answers, and which answers are valid?
Yeah, it's a very common problem. Who here has heard somebody talk about single version of the truth? Raise your hand if you've heard people talk about that. Usually it's the manager in the room. He's got a baseball bat. He's really frustrated because he asked a question, and then the next week, 5 people came with the answer, and they all came with different answers, right? They said, how many countries are there in the world? And the 5 people all had different answers to the question. And that's pretty frustrating, right? And the solution many organizations have to that is the leader takes out a club and starts clubbing, or they turn to somebody and say, you need to govern the data. And by what I mean by governance is never let anyone come into this room unless they can agree on the answer, because I don't know what to do with 5 different answers. Does this sound familiar to you guys? Have seen the movie before? Speaking of movies, who here has seen the movie Office Space? If you're going to be in this profession, you have to watch that movie, right? So in Office Space, this is like 15 years ago, they have the TPS report. Do you guys remember the TPS report, right? And so every week, IT would pull data out of the different systems and put on everyone's desk the metrics of the business. And this made it much easier to be a leader 15 years ago, because if you asked the question in the room, how many countries or, how many miles traveled in North Carolina are people traveling, there were only 2 answers. Everybody would flip through the report. Oh, the number's 22, and everybody would say 22 in unison because it's the only number that's in the report, or they'd say, I don't know, right? Those were the only 2 answers. So leaders didn't have to worry about this problem of democratizing the data, and people can go off and get different answers, right? I would tell you, if an organization wants to go back 15 years and have single version of the truth, it's really easy, but that is not going to be a good ending. Like that would be miserable. You'd have a lot of I don't knows. The beauty of today with analytics is that all of you can get your hands on data, and it almost doesn't matter the question, even if the data is dirty. You probably can get insight from the data that will lead to a better answer than the I don't know answer, because you don't have access to any data. And so the solution actually is not preventing people from having the calculators or getting access to the data. That's actually part of the solution. The problem, in the example I just gave, is actually probably more to do with the leader. Because from my experience, when the 5 people come in and they give the different answers, none of them are actually wrong. It's not like they don't know how to do math. Like, they're all accurate answers. I was just in a meeting with our executive team, and we asked a simple question: how many customers did we add last week? And you pulled the last 7 days. You did Monday through Sunday. You decided, well, when you say new customer, I mean, that could be an existing customer that bought new stuff, or is it an all new? You all pulled it differently, and the problem was the leader, when they asked the question, didn't explain why they were asking the question. And depending on the reason why you're asking the question, some of these ways might be better than other ways. And when you all come with different answers, if the leader is curious and nice, oh, how did you pull the data? And well, maybe there's insight that comes from understanding how different people pulled the data. And so organizations today are struggling with this. Should we go back in time, lock everything down solution? Or do we go forward in time and actually educate people how to do this better? And my hope for you is you're part of an organization that's moving forward and not rearward. But single version of the truth is really not the solution. You want diverse views of what's going on and probe the data to get better answers.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
Gil, I got a question along the lines of anybody who's in any business today, the conversation about dashboarding. In fact, it's become a verb, dashboarding. When you retired from Delta, the CEO, Ed Bastian, said Gil's team brought Delta from the bottom of the industry in operational performance to the worldwide gold standard in reliability. As a leader of that team, with such sounding success, how often did you monitor performance metrics? And what were you using dashboards? And if not, what were you using?
Yeah, I'm fanatical about dashboards, I guess. In the airline business, we had a lot of data, as my two colleagues mentioned. Being able to get to single source of the truth, being able to cut the data, analyze it, that's all part and parcel to the game. But I think ultimately you get what you measure, so you really got to develop your metrics very carefully. We did. And you've got to look at it holistically so you don't suboptimize the business, I think is the big lesson there. Generally, we would organize our dashboards that kind of capture the essence of the whole business. So there's a safety pillar, and by the way, I should say we would have, there's several pillars here all outlined, but we also had a rule that in order to stay focused, you had to have between 3 or 5 maximum goals per pillar, or you start to lose focus. But generally, I think any business it's applicable. Safety, right? Virtually everything you should have a safety metric. Certainly, the airline we did. You had operational metrics, on-time performance, cancellations, misplaced bags as an example. You had customer metrics, generally net promoter score or service recovery scores when things didn't go well. From the customer vantage point, how well did you do? And then the commercial metrics, right? And then generally, at least we did, and I think it's good practice, you should have people metrics as well. If you really got a holistic business approach, you put your people first, then they take care of your customers ultimately. So we had people metrics. And I found that all those apply in the autonomous vehicle world. Now, we are in the business that I'm in now, it is an interesting transition because we basically have been working for about a decade to make the tech work. Make the vehicles drive themselves, right? Really hard problem to solve. And it's more of a project-based problem, right? So we're really good at managing projects and programs and tech and AI and ML, but lousy at dashboards. So we stood up our first dashboards last year, but we really didn't have a business to manage, candidly, or even an operation to manage. So over the last 12 months, we have. Now, as we're moving to really commercialize and scale our business, the dashboards are really important. So all those pillars that I mentioned for Delta are the same pillars that we have in our business now, and we've worked through the metrics. What we don't have, unfortunately, is much baseline data, right? Because ideally, if you're a mature company, a big company, you got tons of data. You kind of know what your baselines are. Set the goal to kind of continuous improvement to keep driving. You tie your reward systems to it, and it's just continuous process of shooting fish in a barrel. When you've never done it before, there's no baseline data. So it's a little different approach. The variance is much wider than what I've experienced in my prior lives, but at the same time, it's pretty exciting, to try to take a business that's never been done before, that's really a new historic mode of transportation, and lay the basic science and management of managing with data on top of it.
follow-up question on that, and I also invite the other panelists to speak in on this as well. What actions did you take to encourage buy-in from the team? I mean, you came into Cruise already existed, and you now have put them under some dashboarding and metrics and collecting that type of data.
Yeah, great question. You know, and I think candidly, I think it starts with responsibility, right? And I think you look for people that want to take responsibility for managing results, not just managing activities. And then the metrics are just a scoreboard to do that with, right? So I think it starts there. I also think you've got to empower people, so it's just not an order-driven system. You know, understanding context and the why behind things, just like you were talking about with the data, is really important. The question why, but ultimately, what are we trying to do? The why behind it, and then people have context, and they're able. I'm blessed. I work with some really brilliant people, and I think just having the understanding is half the battle of what we're trying to do. And then really empower them to do it, but also reward them based on the results. So it's not enough just to be rewarded for the activities. You got to be reward system has to be results oriented, and then it just builds on itself. But it's also got to be a team sport, I think, is another key fundamental element of it, because it's not one thing for one person or even a group or an organization to succeed. The enterprise has to. So having reward systems that encourage that and tie it so you don't sub-optimize the business, I think, is really important too.
Brett, Alan?
Yeah, I'll add in. How many people here have built the dashboard that other people use? Okay, and how many people here have used a dashboard that somebody else has built? It's like everybody, right? And I will tell you that most of the time when I look at most companies, what they're doing with dashboards is they've typically built hundreds of dashboards, and single digits are being used regularly. Does that resonate with most of you? I see a lot of heads going vertical. And that's very common. And I think most of the people who build dashboards weren't necessarily trained, I would say, on how do you do this. If you think about, I'll use a car and the dashboard, pretty much everything on the dashboard is changing your behavior. If you're driving too fast, slow down. If you're running out of gas, go to a gas station, right? Everything ties basically to an action, or it's not terribly useful. But most of the time when people build dashboards that are going to be used by other people on an ongoing basis, they haven't necessarily figured out, look, my job, the whole reason I'm putting this time into making this dashboard is actually to change somebody else's behavior. And have I put the right things in front of them that really are going to change their behavior on an ongoing basis? It's not an easy thing to do. There's a real skill and art to doing that. And so what I find with many organizations is they've invested in maybe some great technology. They've invested in the training on how to use the technology to produce something on the screen, but they actually haven't invested in the education of how do you get the actions to happen out of it. And so, if you see that, I would tell you there is training for that. And it is really important if you're going to have effective outcomes. Because in all the ways you talked about the metrics, I would actually say it was probably not the dashboard driving it. There was a review cadence with probably someone like you looking at the number going, well, you're not going to get your bonus unless that needle moves in the right direction. And so at the end of the day, it's really important to think about that change management part of what you're doing with these dashboards.
Yeah, and that part's the hard part too, is because there are very few leaders that are actually want to do the accountability piece. And so the more non-specific the metrics are, the easier it is for me to pretend like everything's going well. And so because those metrics reflect on the whole organization, and I see a lot of obfuscation that goes on in metric building. Things get buried, and all of a sudden no one can connect with it. You can't hold the leader accountable for those metrics, and you certainly can't hold the workforce accountable. So I'm with you on that. I think there's a whole lot of ducking and covering when it comes to building good dashboards, and it comes down to leadership.
Yeah, and I would just add too, I think it's key, I agree 100%. I think it's also key that you cascade the enterprise dashboard down through the organization at an individual level so people know how they contribute to it. They have context for what you're trying to achieve as a enterprise, but if I'm just making it up, if I'm running if I'm running a ramp in Atlanta or in Raleigh, North Carolina, what am I measured on, right? It's hard to measure you on the success of the airline necessarily, but I can be measured on the success of Raleigh baggage, on-time performance, my people or customers satisfied. Having the data to be able to cut it at a localized level and feed it and analyze it, and then you as a leader of a team, you're able to then set your own dashboard. It's tied and cascaded and improved by your leader. Then it's all kind of then it works in concert, and the reward systems are cascaded as well. But otherwise, if it's just one dashboard at the enterprise level, no hope for sure.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Good conversation there. This is for all of you, and I guess it started out, when I originally wrote it, it started out that it made the assumption that it was critical. Organizational data governance is a critical component, especially when it comes to security. What other ways has data governance been critical in aspects of your organization?
So I think first we'll start with a definition. So when the folks in the room think about governance, is that like a fun thing or not a fun thing? Boo, I hear some boos, right? And so I think governance, like government, helps you achieve your dreams. Keeps you safe, right? But helps you get to your destination. If I compare to living in the United States to maybe living in North Korea, and I think about government and governance, right? Maybe it doesn't have quite the same negative connotation because it's not just a series of rules to follow that is part of governance, but it's also training and education and the things to help you be able to get to a result. And so governance for me, and I'll use governance at Alteryx, I'll use governance from when I was at Ford, when I ran data and analytic governance, it had a lot to do with education and training, just as much to do with that as rules. And when somebody came to a design review and they put something up and we went, wait, where did you get that data? And that doesn't look like the right place to get the data from. We could have conversations around, hey, might there be a better place to get the data? And why don't we help you go get that better data? Now, the other thing about governance that many people don't necessarily realize, and this gets to kind of the democratization, is when you democratize analytics and you have, let's say, everyone in the room can get to data and analyze data, it changes the way people need to think about governance. So today, if you're a finance professional and you build a finance forecast model for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and you mess it up, whose fault is it? Yours, right? And if you go to IT and you ask IT to build you a financial forecasting model, who has to approve it? The finance team, right? Not IT, the finance team, right, has to approve it, not the data scientist. The finance team still is responsible for it. And so a lot of times I think organizations forget that you already have governance. Like your tax team has governance, your finance team has governance, your IT teams have governance. Like all of the teams already have governance models of how they check work and how they do their things. When technology comes in and you're using data, all that existing governance applies and the rules don't totally change. It's not like suddenly IT gets to approve or not approve what data source you're using or not approving. The finance person is still accountable and responsible. Are they using the right data source? And so now if you're a data and analytic head of a company, look, I can't check your work. I can't tell you if you did the right financial model. I'm not a finance expert, right? But I can ask questions, I can help, I can maybe make you aware of something you weren't aware of, and hopefully do this continuous improvement thing. I think when organizations think about governance through that lens versus you're now the police and you need to make sure everyone's doing it right kind of a method, you get to a very different destination.
I would just add, I think at least the way we've approached it is that there are the sources of data, first of all, so that we're not having competing sources of data, and my data is better than your data, and we get into these data wars, the one source of the truth. We've got governance, an organization that is responsible for all the data, and the pipelines, the databases, et cetera, right? That same organization either buys or builds the tools that we analyze the data with, then it's liberated to the organization, that anybody in the organization can access the data, use the tools to do their thing. Now, the data can be limited in access, right? There's customer data that you really want to control. There's other data that's, more folks can use. And then we've got that governance aspect in terms of accessibility to different data. So we've really tried to take a structural approach to it, but ultimately the idea is that anybody, anybody has the tools available to them, the data sources to do their job, and the ability to cut the data. If they need things that go beyond the functionality of the tools to build ML models around the data itself, then there's a different approach to go to be able to access that level of technology.
Yeah, I think governance, if you have legacy systems, it's a completely different issue, because you're now saying we have 30 years of stuff. Your stuff's new. Yeah, you're lucky, you dog. Yeah, it's really cool. You can get to data maturity so fast, you new guys. But I think when you're in that legacy system of all of this data's been around a while, it's a different issue around governance. I think that probably the easiest first step is to start standardizing your inputs and know what you want the data for. Don't try to clean it all up, and certainly don't pass a lot of rules. I mean, it's small steps. If your end goal is somehow or other you're going to take all of this data that you've got there and it's suddenly going to be governable, I think that's a losing proposition. I think that ultimately you're going to find the data you can migrate forward that's useful to answering the questions you need to answer, and you're going to start creating better data through rules and giving folks the tools to make sure they input things better. And that's the other part, I think, is how do we get things in the system in a consistent manner? And that's easy. We don't have to tell people what to do. We just have to give them easy tools to get it in there so we have consistent data. Your guys have a way to get data in there that's pretty consistent. They're logging stuff when they're in that vehicle. Everybody's logging the same stuff. And it's the training that goes with that. So you don't have to make them do it. They're just doing it because they're trained to do it, and you gave them the tools to get it in there.
So, some of our challenges, we have too much data.
Yeah,
I mean, literally, we're visualizing the world. So we've got game films, drive-by shootings, people walking by. We've got too much data. So I think there's another dimension.
Will we see any of that on YouTube? Or
no, you will not. That's part of the governance thing, right? But I do think it is part of the basic problem we're all faced with is how much data you want to keep, and then how long do you want to keep it as well. But it all starts with the end in mind, ultimately. What are you going to use it for?
All right, we're going to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions?
Test. I think you've all touched on this a little bit, but earlier this morning, Ms. Rainwater talked about how there's a misperception that younger generations are better with technology, but in fact they're better users of technology rather than understanding it. And related to that, I'm wondering, is it a concern, or do you feel that it's a concern that as we have more AI and machine learning and data analytics, that we might have smarter and smarter buttons that we push with people that maybe don't fully understand what's going on behind the button, but they're accountable for those decisions?
I'll start with yes and no. I think that our expectations about what's about to happen in the next 10 years with AI, machine learning, just all of that capability now that's public, it's out there. It is that we're going to have to start educating people differently. And so at the end of the day, the decisions and the creative thinking, I think, will still come down to people for quite a long time. AI is not going to replace them, but we need to start training people differently. And so what's going on behind there. I mean, at the end of the day, machine learning is a black box. We don't know what's going on behind there. You can't open that lid and go, hey, this is how we did that. So there's no way for us to train you on how the computer got there. But there's a way to ask questions of a computer. There's a way to attack problems. And those are people skills that we can still apply. And so if you, I mean, being silly, but think about Star Trek. I mean, they go to the computer and they ask great questions. And they ask them a couple of times, and they use that answers to start crafting a creative breakthrough concept, right? I mean, that's so I think it's a matter of training. I think it's a matter of expectations. And I don't think we should expect that we have to know necessarily what the gears are doing in the background. But we do need to have people that are asking great questions, and they understand why we're trying to solve the problems. So I think it allows humans to actually move another level in creativity. And that's going to be a challenge for organizations to ask better questions, right? You were talking about that earlier.
It's a great question. As I think about it, at least in our application, to put it in perspective, we've got about 3,000 people at our company. 2,500 of them are PhDs, and the average age is probably 28, 29. So I'm an outlier. Yeah. But and by the way, the toughest part for me was moving from Microsoft to Google Docs, where everything's asynchronous all the time. But what I'll say is that I really think it is a blend, because I think the technical capabilities are off the chart with the people I work with. But some of them at least haven't seen, kind of the movie to its, at least the movie a dozen times to see the patterns that emerge out of a business or regulated industry or whatever it is, and we're doing things for the first time. So I really think the power is the blend of experiences that kind of come into this to understand then and iterate around, okay, what are we trying to do? Customer data is a good example of that, right? There are privacy issues here, and there are ways that you should use the data, and there are ways that you should not use the data, and there's regulations around it. So I think that education and then the framework and having the expertise that can kind of overlay, whether it's a framework or governance around the way we're using things, I think really coupled with the skills that are really just emerging out. I mean, look, none of us can keep up with the technology, right? I mean, no matter how brilliant you are, there are so many things happening so quickly. We can all just grasp so much. So we're dependent on managing kind of an organism, if you will, of brilliance. So, but it's that framework and thinking about the unknown unknowns and going about it as a process, I think, and just going into it with your eyes open, that you don't necessarily know everything you need to know, but you need to find out or seek the wisdom, I think, is the way to create the operating environment to make it work.
I'm going to go maybe a slightly different way. Look, if you talk about AI and ML and data science in general, analytics in general, if you went and talked to a college professor, they would tell you that knowing how to use applied analytics is middle school level, not even high school level. It's easy stuff. And it's not, for the most part, it's not black box. We're not talking deep learning. Like 90% of what people do with data to analyze data in business is really easy to understand, very interpretable. And oh, by the way, I'm betting most people in the North Carolina Department of Transportation aren't doing today. It's middle school and high school level. Like, there's no reason that they can't learn it. Hiring people fresh out of school who do know more about some of those technologies, that won't save you because they don't know the business. They don't have the domain knowledge. But people are worried, and I kind of heard it maybe a little bit in your question, well, if I ask everyone in the room to start doing this analytic stuff and they don't know it well, are they like going to hit some button and get some crazy answer and not even realize that? Now, maybe, like, who here has used a scientific calculator? Raise your hand. Okay. Who here knows what every button on a scientific calculator does? Raise your hand. Nobody, but we weren't scared about giving them a scientific calculator because we kind of assumed, and by the way, we didn't have a huge governance oversight board going, I'm going to have to remove 4 buttons from your calculator because you're not certified to use those buttons. We like kind of trust that if you don't know what the button is, either don't hit it or go learn, and we trust if you go learn and you think you know how to use it, you probably know how to use it, right? We make, I think, analytics seem complicated because we use really big vocabulary, like fancy words like correlation and neural networks, and a neural network is a bunch of if-then statements. Like, it's really not that complicated, right? My kids understand neural networks. And so at the end of the day, I think that's part of the problem. Now, by the way, that's a little different then if you want to research the next algorithm that doesn't exist today, that's a lot of what your company does. That's a little bit different because you're going to need a different skill mix, and it's kind of a little bit different, the degrees that you would expect of people working on that. But I think in the context of what most people in this room do and your organizations do, it's a very different game. And the domain experts, the people who've been here for 15 and 20 years, who didn't have the advantage of learning about these technologies in school, they're going to have to learn on the way, no differently than they learned what some of the buttons on that scientific calculator were when they took the job. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Any other questions?
As a business leader, I often struggle with understanding what questions actually to ask or how to develop specific KPIs that help to get the results or motivate in the proper way, and then be able to reward based on those. And so I didn't know if, and you maybe Mr. Jacobson mentioned there's some training available. I didn't know if maybe there's a KPIs for dummies or something that you would recommend to be able to be a better leader and develop those systems throughout our company.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I honestly think we can overthink metrics a lot. You know, somebody told me decades ago that every business comes down to being good, fast, and cheap, you know, and I keep looking back over that and going, yeah, that kind of captures a lot of the essence of it, you know, but I do think I really think every organization, every business, there's some basic things that you have to measure, and there's trade-offs among those things, but I really think safety is key. I think anything that you're doing operationally, you've got to measure and have metrics around. And then I think we've all got customers. Some of them are people that'll pay us money. Some of our customers are just other parts of the organization that we're providing things to. So I think you've got to kind of measure that piece of it. And then there's something with economics, right? Whether it's just a cost center that I'm managing or I'm trying to manage revenue or both. I think there's some aspect of resources that we're responsible for that we're managing. And then I think it's just situational to whatever it is that you happen to do, you know, in an organization. And you just think through to try to simplify it. Now, the dilemma is you can keep thinking to the point that you got 1,000 things that you're measuring and you just lose focus. So I think you've got to kind of take some stakes at it and go, okay, these are the things that really, really matter. There'll be other metrics that kind of feed those that you keep an eye on, but you manage those top line results and you win as an organization, as a company. And then I think it's iterative. Every year you revisit those and go, did that one really make sense? Should I do something different? And there's no perfect science to it, but I think it's, you know, it's the old adage, perfection's the enemy of progress. As long as you start somewhere and you get some decent metrics, you manage to them, you know, you make progress, and then you can kind of keep playing with the knobs, has been my experience.
So I'll give you one, at least, thing that I think a lot about, and that is input versus output metrics. So look, my hope, which hopefully you can tell from our conversation today, is I hope everyone in this room becomes more analytic. Next year I come here and you're doing more with data than ever before. So we can set that as a metric, like how much value did each of you create with analytics, and we can try to track that. But that's an output metric. What's the input? The input, I want everyone to do at least one training class on analytics next year. That'd be an input metric. And the hope would be if we get the inputs right, the output will happen. Like we have to have some belief. In the end, it's about change management. Like you're trying to change an outcome. That's why you have the metric. And so I think that it's important to spend time figuring out, well, what are you actually trying to change? What are the inputs and what are the outputs?
And on change management piece, I spent a lot of time on that piece. I did a whole lot of acquisitions and merger work, and it's all about change management, as you well know. But the key there is you can actually change the wrong things. And that's the other piece. And I think you set a metric, you're going to manage to it. If it's the wrong thing, boy, you can really screw things up in a hurry, can't you? I mean, I've seen it happen. It's like, we got to get rid of that other culture's thing. and lose all of what we invested in. I've seen it happen.
All right, I'm going to ask the last question. This is not typically what most companies have to deal with, but government agencies deal with this all the time. Would you have a concern that if all your company's decision-making data was available to everybody on the World Wide Web? And if so, what would you do? How would you manage that? So everything that it has for your company is on google.com question.
Damn if I know. No.
Would you be concerned? The question is, would you be concerned?
Yeah. Well, I think so. But, I personally, we treat it within our entity business, we kind of treat it that way. I think the larger the audience, they don't necessarily have the context, right? So I would be concerned over the context. But at the same time, I really believe that the brutal facts set you free. If you really look at things, and no matter what it's telling you, and you face it head on, you can affect it, right? You can have a positive impact on it. Sometimes, you don't want it on the cover of Wall Street Journal, but at the same time, it's a catalyst, right? So I don't, spending most of my career in private industry, I don't. But number of industries, very transparent. Airlines are an example of that. Autonomous business is an example of that. We share everything with all the regulators to the point that I think it was today that Wall Street Journal takes all that data from the DOT for the airlines, and they basically stack rank the best airlines. Delta was first, by the way. And but if you look
carrying
at
on tradition, that
exactly,
said.
yeah. No, but I do think some of that. And by the way, it wasn't always the case. I go back a dozen years, we were last. But that reporting of data, to me, was the kick in the pants. It said this. First you argue, well, they're not scoring it right. The system's bad. The data's bad. Bullshit. You can fix it, and you can move to the top. And that, to me, is
Does that sound familiar to anybody from DOT in the last, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I would share much of the same belief. You could probably find some pieces of data that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to share to the world. If you're a private company, there might be a few pieces of data that you view as competitive advantage, but the large amount of data that most organizations have, that's not their competitive advantage. And actually, if you will share it even with your competitors, it'll probably make you better. The key is you got to do something about it. And so it's the actions that you're taking, not the data in and of itself. And so coming from the automotive industry for 25 plus years, very collegial, a lot of data shared across manufacturers. I remember owning all of the prototype expenditure for a company and wanting to benchmark. Well, how many prototypes did you build versus how many prototypes did I build, and who does this the most efficiently? There are third parties like Harbor Manufacturing that benchmarks every manufacturing plant in the world, counting up how many workers every manufacturing plant, and shared competitively across different companies. And so at the end of the day, those things drove an entire industry to get better. And I think that's what everybody wants. And so it doesn't actually scare me a ton to share data, even with competitors, because, again, I'm a competitive person. I view I'll be able to use that data to drive improvement faster than the other guy, and that's probably what's going to make me a winner or a loser.
Yeah, from the standpoint of inside of an organization, let's say you do a survey of customers and stakeholders. You do a survey of employees and management. At the end of the day, the only people who don't know those answers tend to be the executives. It's like this big secret that it's broke, right? And it's sort of, to some extent, that having public and transparent data that's out there just starts the ball in the right direction. As soon as the Wall Street Journal says, hey, we're last, it's at some point in time, we can blame everybody. They don't understand our business. They're all lying. You only listen to complainers. I hear it all the time. And it's really, we got to change. Yeah, it's the change management at the top, right? So.
All right, we'll be sending a request for information to each of your companies. and it will be all. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding, of course. Reason I ask that question is that's our life on a daily basis in DOT and other agencies and there's people out there with various levels of expertise on not only the understanding the data, how to analyze it, how to use it, but also interpret it. And we have to be prepared to respond to all of the above, regardless of the expertise of the or quality of the question. And that's the point that I think from our standpoint is that that's quite an expensive ordeal that many private companies don't have to deal with. All right, we're going to get to the poll question, and how did it have anything to do with this topic today? Well, I failed to mention that there was no right answer, but our panelists have said this on a number of times about data. There is no right answer. It all depends upon the question. It all depends upon what you measure. Those who pick Michael Jordan, of course, he's got, if you did the number of NBA titles or scoring titles, he's got 6 titles, 10 scoring titles. We will disregard the statement from the panelists on the North Carolina bias. LeBron James, who many people will argue until the end of the days that he may be one day, but he's only got 4 titles, and he's obviously hadn't achieved the level of Michael Jordan. Yep. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the all-time leading scorer. LeBron is number 2 on that list. 6 NBA titles, just like Michael Jordan. 15 All-Star selections, and inventor of the skyhook, something very innovative that could not be challenged. Magic Johnson, 5 championships, made his team better. 3 NBA final MVPs. Kobe Bryant, which I'm surprised no one had voted for Kobe, but 5 NBA championships, 18 All-Stars, 14 All-NBAs, 12 All-Defense, played both sides of the ball. And then Larry Bird, people say, well, how did Larry Bird get on there? Of course, Larry Bird is known as the greatest trash talker of all time on basketball.
He was a garbage man.
And so the thing with Larry Bird was he backed up his trash talking. That was one of the things he did. So when you look at the various analytics, who's the greatest basketball player, you got to come back and say, based on what? Because if you did most points, it's Kareem. If it's based on titles, then it's Michael Jordan and Kareem tied together. If it's based on scoring, leadership in single seasons, Michael Jordan. If it's based on location where you're born, then it's Michael Jordan. And that's what our poll came out is Michael Jordan at 68%, LeBron at 6%, Kareem at 9%, Magic at 4%, Kobe at 0%, and the trash talking king came in the number with 13%. So I'm going to turn the podium back over to Pat and close out the session.
Brett, Gil, Alan, thank you. As we wrap up the session, I'd like to take a minute to thank our partner, NCGO, for hosting the 2023 Transportation Summit and the additional sponsors. You'll find a great networking opportunity at the NCDOT Office of Civil Rights Business Development Zone. For those that are logging professional development hours, you will be self-reporting, and the staff will get you a form for that self-reporting. Tonight, HTNB is going to be hosting a reception from 5 to 7 in the exhibitor hall, and thank you for attending today.